Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, brought to you by Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard, joining you as always on this fabulous Thursday in which we release our podcasts. We are talking all things talent and skills today, and I am going to be chatting to a couple of lovely gentlemen around our campaign, a little bit around our campaign, which is called Becoming Skills Powered. You can find out more about that on the Lace website. You can either get that through the homepage, or if you go onto our insights section, we've got a whole campaign section on this campaign that we are running, Becoming Skills Powered. And it's all around this idea of skills-based organizations, because I don't know about you, but I have seen articles, I have listened to podcasts, I have watched videos, I've seen people produce white papers. There's a lot of chatter around skills-based organizations. So I'm going to chew the fat a little bit around that. And to do that, I need a co-host and partner in crime. And today it is Mr. Chris Horton joining me again. How are you doing, sir? You all right?
Chris Howard, really good, thank you. Enjoying the sunshine, that's for sure.
Yes, enjoying the sunshine. Although when we actually release this, you just know that it'll be absolutely bucketing down with rain. So whoever's listening to this will be thinking, what are those two on about? We have a fabulous guest. It is Anthony Nash, who is co-founder of an organization called Leadership Success. How are you doing, Ant? You all right?
I'm good, Chris, mate. Yourself, you well?
Yes, fabulous. Excited to get into this and start delving into this, because you and I have had a couple of conversations around this topic of skills-based organizations. We've gone on some of them a little bit sort of macro, a bit meta, and sometimes we've sort of drilled into the details. So we could go in any directions, but we'll have a bit of fun just kicking it around a little bit. Before we do that, do you want to tell our fabulous listeners who maybe might not have heard about your good self a little bit about your background and then the organization that you run as well?
So I've been in and around the development base, leadership development, as the name suggests, Leadership Success, for about 12 years now. I co-founded Leadership Success around about 2011, 2012. I lost count, to be honest. I forgot. It all just blends into one another. So essentially what we do is help companies with their emerging frontline middle managers. So providing analytics, development, support, help them to become more efficient. We're deep into the research on this. Years ago, we formed working partnership with the University of New South Wales in Australia, their organisational psychology unit, and also the Australian Graduate School of Management, their business school. So look, I've got lots to share in terms of thoughts, observations at the corporate level, and also where the research is going. So I'm happy to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to have a chat, man.
Yeah, really, really good. So tradition on this pod dictates that we need to kick off with what we call a fundamentally different question. And I'm going to give you a few seconds respite to think up your answer. Of course, just for those of you that may be listening for the first time, this is a completely random and different question, not relating to HR. Mr. Horton, today's question I've got for you, I just read an article which was Olympics based, and there was a whale that's been pictured kind of doing one of those breaching into the out of the sea, photobombing the Olympic surfing competition. So my question to you, my fundamentally different question to you to kick us off today is, if there was one animal that you'd like to photobomb one of your pictures, what would it be?
I think a lion would be pretty cool, as long as they were a fair distance
not too
away
close
from you. Yeah. So thinking about it, I definitely think it would be cool as a surprise to see a lion in the background, but hopefully I'm not so close that they're going to eat me.
Like it, Ant?
A bonobo, I think.
A what?
A bonobo. They're like a chimpanzee, but they're like super cheeky. So the chances are that if it's photobombing you, it's going to show you, it's going to put its bum in the air or do something really stupid. I've seen them do that kind of crazy stuff. So that's I know it's random, but they're hilarious. So
I love it.
That's my random answer.
Monkeys are the jesters of the jungle, and I love it. My selection was going to be kind of like, whether it's a photobomb or not, but just like a nice big silverback just coming along, just putting arms around you. But again, if you're that close, maybe that that could not end well.
Yeah, see, I did for a second then I think gorilla, and then I thought, you know what though? Whereas a smaller ape, if it gets close to you, even though it's stronger than us, it's not going to tear you limb from limb necessarily. A gorilla, if it gets slightly displeased with you, maybe like, okay, it's over for you, Chris.
Yeah, there we go. So we've got a lion, could be over for Chris. A lion, it could be over for Chris. And you've gone with the bonobo, which certainly you're coming out the best from that. Right, let's kick on to the main topic of today. I'm going to jump in with the first question, and then Mr. Horton, I'll let you add any bits on after we've quizzed Ant on this. And this is this idea of skills-based organisation. So starting it off, I guess, nice and easy and open-ended question, which is really around this idea of like what a skills-based organization is, whether this is something that you're seeing more organizations talking about, because to us there's been quite a lot of chatter in the market, but also I guess like the real question, like any questions that you would have for organizations that maybe are talking to you and saying, we're thinking about this is the direction we need to go.
Start with the big question. All right, so how about maybe if I can go back a step and frame it up a little bit. So the thing I like to ask a lot with these types of things is, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? So I've been thinking about this. I as you know, I do my own pod. I talk to a lot of C-level executives from around the world. The place I suppose I'd start with this is saying, what are companies really trying to do? I think it's around productivity, right? So, and they're saying that essentially top-down hierarchical, centralized decision-making, all of that type of stuff. It's not quick enough. It's not agile enough. You can't get enough done. There's too much decision requirement in the hands of too few people. So what we're essentially trying to do, I think, is to say, how do you break down work such that as much as possible, it can be self-managed at the place where the work's being done. Now, that's not to say everything can be self-managed, but it's looking at things like, you know, let's say from a HR, like obviously the domain that I'm familiar with from a leadership perspective, can some of these people issues, things that come up, things that problems we might be able to deal with, whether it's change, innovation, etc., to what degree can that be done more effectively, right, at the front line? And then, so I think where that then blends into this idea of the skills-based organization is saying, well, people inside an organization in these various work teams have different skills, right, which go beyond just the specific job that you're doing, and is saying, how do we as HR leaders allow those people to become more mobile internally such that they can be deployed to best effect? And when I say best effect, just I suppose to put a frame around that is saying doing work that people are good at, that they for the most part enjoy, because let's face it, not every you're not going to love everything every day. There's always going to be some hard graft, but doing stuff they're good at and that they enjoy that adds value for the organization. So I think that's, to me, the skills-based organization is attempt to say, can we decentralize things and help people to self-organize? So that's kind of my view. Now, will this become a thing in the future? I think unequivocally, yes. And the reason why I'm saying unequivocally yes is that it's competition, it's evolution, right? So as the markets and people are out there providing products and services in whatever form, and customers are choosing one business over another, those that are more productive, agile, innovative, they're the ones that are going to succeed and thrive. So it's basically, I think it's a question of, this is where just the global economy is going. And so it's then a thing of, well, are you going to get on board with that or not? And then also to what degree? Because some organizations have more competitive pressures, let's say, than others.
It's both on sort of the company level, talking about productivity, but on an individual level, how that's going to come to life for people. I think the interesting thing, so when you look at companies like Unilever, IBM, Deloitte, those kind of ones that are sort of at the advanced stages of actually implementing this, do you think the data is actually saying that it's successful, or are they sort of doing it at degree of maturity? Have they gone full into it? Because, for example, Unilever's done this for probably at least 5 years, maybe close to a decade now, and was one of the leading ones. Do you think there's lots of evidence that this is starting to work, or are there things that organizations should watch out for?
Again, that's a big question. I haven't seen any specific data from those guys, right? But I think there's a couple of things to this. So if I go at the very high level, there's tons of research. Let's say it's empowering the individuals, right, and empowering the teams to better self-organize. In terms of empirical research going back to like the 1970s, there's tons and tons of stuff on that it creates higher productivity, fosters innovation, becomes more able to cope with change, higher employee engagement and retention, and all of that type of stuff. So I'd say at the academic level, nothing's indisputable, you know what I mean? Because science is just a process of learning. But I would say there is a huge body of evidence that says that this as a broad concept works very well. Now, if we get then down to the next level, it depends at an individual company level, the things that they're thinking about. Because to me, the big question, let's talk about the prerequisite, I suppose, that's required in order for the skills-based organization to flourish, like the foundation, I suppose, that I see that built upon. And that is, and I'm sure Chris, you guys have heard this before, but for those who haven't, organizational climate. Now, what the organizational climate essentially means, it's different to organizational culture, although they're often lumped together. So organizational culture is more of a social science construct that says, how do we do things together? What do we value? What are our morals? What's taboo? All of that type of stuff. So as opposed to the sort of social science or sociology construct, organizational climate is a psychological construct. And what that means essentially is, how do you feel? How do you experience work when you show up every day? And that, I think, is the thing that gives rise to that saying of, don't leave an organization, you leave a bad manager or whatever. And so, and obviously, you know, we've seen things like psychological safety and all of that sort of stuff become repopularized, which actually was just out of innovation research from like 50 years ago, but they've reworded it and whatever. So long way of saying, if that organizational climate, that individual work climate that the person experiences every day isn't really strong and cohesive, I think that's the foundation on which the skills-based organization needs to be built. Because otherwise, things like, let me give you like a real simple example. If I have somebody who's good in my team, but maybe they want some stretch assignments, now I know that there's a team down the way there that's looking for somebody who this person would be perfect for. Do I give that person over? Do I give my blessing to that? So there is some organizational culture issues, which is that a done thing here? But also it's a climate thing, right? Me as the manager, what conditions am I creating? What conditions is my manager creating for me, etc. So I think that, I suppose, to summarize on that, the 2 points are absolutely the evidence says that it does work if that's what we're moving towards, but that in order for it to be successful, the climate has to be solid and you have to be measuring that, because without it, it's almost like they're the sort of conditions necessary for this type of thing to thrive, I think. And that's just kind of my view.
I guess talking a bit more in detail about that, to create that climate, there's often a mindset shift. Now, it may not be the whole organization that needs to happen, but it might be a mindset shift amongst leadership. It might be a mindset shift amongst middle management. What kind of things do you think, from a foundational perspective, do you need to put in place? Because I know when we talk with different organizations, some people really get hooked on, I've had jobs in place, I know how to manage jobs and do that. So to even understand then, how do I structure things around skills? How do I manage projects? How do I do all of the different component parts? How do I performance manage? It becomes a real sort of mind blocker to them because they're so used to a different way of working. What kind of things have you seen that you need to challenge, I guess, and then put in place?
Okay, so is this from the perspective of like a CPO or a HR team, or from the perspective of an individual manager, or both?
It could be, to me, both across different business units and the sort of corporate function side of things, but also from an individual perspective. So I know, having worked with different organizations where pockets, so HR might be fully supportive of the concept and actually from a mindset perspective being there, but different business units that maybe slightly more traditional in their management approach are really quite concerned that it's going to be difficult and they're going to start losing money rather than, they see it as an exercise of ivory tower sort of doing it. So I'm just interested in the kind of things that you think people should focus on.
The first is evolution, not revolution. So whenever I've seen organizations and it's like a massive change and, we're going to do this. And there was a bank in Australia. I remember I followed this case for a while, and big, they're famous. You can look it up if you're curious, but they're like, we're going agile. And then the CEO talked about that, and we're going to transform the organization. And that was, after that announcement, was pretty much the last I'd heard of that. So I think it's like anything, it's evolving, right, is change. And I know it's such a cliche that they say change is constant, but it is. I mean, I don't know even why we use the word change, as in it's just we evolve. This is what happens, right? In life, in the universe, all of those types of things. So the first thing I'd do is start small and find the people who are really willing to embrace this in the organization. And there will be a few. There's ways of measuring that and identifying who those people are. And then so the first thing is find those people, start small. I'm a huge fan of things like pilot programs, right? So pilot it out and then measure it, get the feedback, see how it's working. There's, depending on what measures you want to set up. So there's all sorts of things that you can do. You can measure it's totally possible to measure their behavior and measure the behavior shift over time. You can obviously look at their performance. You could look at other metrics like retention, turnover, all of those types of things within those groups. And the biggest thing to me is, and this is this whole thing of like self-organizing work teams, right? And this is where I do see there's a chasm here that needs to be crossed, but is that ultimately people in this type of skills-based model are more empowered themselves. So they've got to want to take it on at the end of the day. So there's a couple of things I won't kind of spin off massively because I could go down a total rabbit hole on this, but essentially start small, work it through, measure as you're going. And at the end of the day, as I said, the people have got to want to take it on themselves. So you've got to create the conditions for that rather than trying to do a forced top-down approach, because it's not going to work.
Yeah. Do you know what? I've got to ask you, I need to ask you a question about this, because we sort of talked about it when we were talking about recording this podcast, and it was around the differences between generations, because you've got new generations entering the workforce, and we hear about the Gen Zs versus the millennials and how they like to learn and develop new skills and how that needs to adapt as well. Can I just get your general views around how people will be adapting to skills, these younger people entering into the workforce, and how they'll embrace it? And do you think that's going to be a challenge organizations need to identify, that people will want to learn differently, people will want to adapt differently? Like you talked about the pilots getting people involved, and my immediate head moves to young Gen Zers who will naturally want to adapt and build their new skills and things like that. But so from a generational point of view, do you see there being much impact in terms of the way people develop skills, the way people adapt, evolve? And is that your kind of pockets of people that you're looking at?
I'll answer the last bit first so I don't forget it.
Yeah.
I think it can cross generations, right? I think you're more looking at certain types of personalities. And so what you're looking at is those who are the innovators and early adopters. If for any of those that don't understand that terminology, it's like getting products and innovation out to market and saying who are the people that basically want to buy the stuff first. So they're the types of personalities. Again, you can measure stuff like this to identify these types of people. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, without going like too broad, the whole generational thing, I'm not so sure, and I've never really seen any convincing research on that thing, that it is, it's this Gen X and this and or it's just that, look, when people are young, right, and they come into a workplace, because if you think back to when you first entered the workforce, let's say, and you weren't like beaten down by the awful reality that is life, you're like, yeah, I want to do this, I want to do that, this is going to be awesome. So you wanted to be able to say those things, but you couldn't, because it's like that's not the way that it's done here. So the culture kind of shapes you, right? Whereas I think now, because there's like these broader social things happening, companies are evolving and saying, actually bring your whole self to work, be who you are, etc. People feel, it's not that they haven't felt this before, it's just that now they feel more able to say it. Now, that being said, I think being able to self-determine to a greater degree your career path, yeah, absolutely. Of course, that's something they want. Most people do. Not now, let's say not everybody. And that's also another thing that I'll just sort of sneak in there, I suppose, is that before assuming that everybody wants to go down this path, like a good thing would be to ask them. And like, let's say at the CPO level or HR leader level, there's too many things that you need to do, right? And not enough time. That's just kind of the way of the world. It's a core thing to say, like, is this really actually an important thing for us in our sea of all the other priorities and stuff that we have to get done? And then also each individual, like the one thing that I've seen, and you see this with like career pathing assessments and things like that, it starts from the assumption that you want to progress. Now, some people are, and you know, they go into certain jobs, like local government's a good example. They go in there for the stability. It's not for a dynamic career. They work to live, not live to work. So let's say I think that is an important distinction there. And then saying, but those people who are interested and engaged and want to progress, yeah. I mean, the other thing is, I think the younger folks, obviously, because of societal change, are way more tech savvy because they grew up completely immersed in it. So they're more likely to be able to jump onto an app and do all that kind of stuff.
So we've talked about, obviously, asking people and, you know, getting confirmation. Let's go down the road of people do want career progression and they do want to go down. So they've got the right skill set, the right mindset around skills. As we're looking to, so we've talked a lot about self-managing teams, but there are certain parts of work that will always require some form of management.
Yep.
Or question mark. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then I guess the second to me is we have line managers as a fairly traditional concept. Now that's got probably more complicated over decades and decades of different management theory and different things that people have done organizationally. I've seen lots of things where people talk about simplifying the line manager role in a skills-based organization and talking about coaching and mentoring are the key things that need to happen. Interested in what your view, Ant, is. Do you see that, obviously, as we move to self-managed teams, there's probably less intervention, less direction. What's your view on that?
In a nutshell, yes, I agree. Some things are going to be still needed to be managed top down. That's scale, right? And we do know that standardization at scale does bring benefits. So I don't disagree with that at all. I think the role of the leader, yeah, it depends on how you lead at the moment. But certainly the more stuff people are doing themselves and the more people and teams are able to self-organize, the more you need to be saying, right, well, what do you need from me? And otherwise I'll get out of the way, right, and let you get on with it. And then your role becomes, as you say, more coaching, mentoring, removing blocks and obstacles, you know, navigating and negotiating internally, that kind of stuff. So if you're already that kind of manager or leader, I don't think, you know, it's like, okay, you know, you're going to keep going down that path. Now, if you're a micromanager for everybody's work, then yeah, this is going to be a massive shift because it's a complete 180 to how you're actually used to showing up and doing your job every day. So for those types of people, it's going to change massively. And I think just with that as well, and we talk about the skills-based organization, the skills mix for a manager is going to change. Because I think, and not saying in all circumstances, but in a lot of circumstances, it's saying, well, you don't need to be the subject matter expert anymore, which is where a lot of people have come from because they were good technically at their job. They get promoted up because that's the career path that's available to get more money. So yeah, I think that's going to need to be rethought. But I think alongside that, with the skills-based organization, is a lot of people who say, yeah, I don't want to lead people. I like things, not people. So cool. You can make your career and make more money being a specialist without having to necessarily rise through the ranks and manage people. So the people versus things thing, I think, is going to become super important, even more so than it is now. And they're going to need to be selecting on that.
We've got a few minutes left and I kind of want to do kind of any final thoughts. But before we do that, a quick question. I was going to ask you, what does the leader of the future look like? But you've kind of touched on that with the kind of the coaching, the mentoring, and perhaps the skills that they will need to evolve from that traditional sort of idea. If I flip that from a business perspective, what does a business need to be doing to supporting leaders transitioning into this kind of more coaching, mentoring, facilitating type thing, do you think?
Well, you got to develop the skills. But also you got to be looking at having realistic conversations with them. And again, this is not, as I say, go back to evolution, not revolution. You got to do it a little bit at a time, right? Because you don't want to disrupt your entire organization. That would be a disaster. But you start planting the seeds of, okay, well, this is what we want for the future. And we're also going to test, because the other thing that gets talked about a lot, and I'm going to just jump tiny bit, Chris Howard, but to, the employee experience, right? So we got to be thinking about these employees. Almost, you're bringing a product development and marketing mindset to HR, right? And saying, well, the employees are customers. And so in that sense, every organization is slightly different because the makeup of your employees are different. So you got to see, well, what do they need? What is our profile? And then how do we start developing this, but also start building a groundswell where the individuals want to take this on? And so that, again, is about you start with a small segment and prove the wins. I tell you, there's some people I've spoken to in the States at massive companies, which I won't mention, like tens, 20s, 30s, thousands of people that have gone whole hog. One that I spoke to recently, 130,000 people, whole hog on massive change programs. They failed. And then they had to wind them back. And these are Fortune 500 companies, right? So, gosh, just take it step by step and just think like agile. Do it, review it, come back, refine it, and just keep going in that. And then eventually you'll get to the point where the thing starts to roll itself out because people start requiring it. So that's my thoughts.
And what are the final things around? So if you look at in talking about an agile perspective, do it, review it. What are the key things that you think need to change from a mindset perspective there? So is it just talking with leadership first? Is it the pockets of pilot with certain group? Where would you start, I guess, is the key thing if you were looking for this?
If I was a chief people officer?
Yep.
Yeah, where would I start? Okay. So first thing is you have to listen. Right. And I know that sounds obvious, but listen and don't tell. So find out, go and talk to the employees. Now, when I say talk, maybe it's physically talk to them. Often it's like, well, ask them some questions, find a way of getting that feedback. Think, like you're developing a product and saying, well, I've got to establish product market fit here. So first thing is to understand my customers, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think, and I'm not saying, again, this is an instant thing, but I think HR, there's just the centralized control and doing things from top down is just not going to work forever because it's just too complex. And the work teams, all that stuff is becoming too complex. So you're going to say, well, actually, we have to stop thinking about trying to control everything centrally, and we have to learn to let the reins go. Now, the bridge in between, let's say, executive leadership and the rest of the organization is trust. So it's like, well, do I actually trust if I start letting these things go that it's not going to turn into an absolute mess? So, that's a thing I would look at. And then, so it's basically saying, okay, we need to devolve it. Where's the trust at in the organization? Who are the people that think this is a good idea? And making sure that there's enough people in general that want to go down this path that you're not forcing them. And a good example of this, just very quickly, Chris H, to finish on this, like you think about wellness, right? It's a fantastic concept. I love it. Right. But post-COVID, especially, people are saying, yeah, we've got to do this wellness thing. It's a great idea. So what I found out from a guy who operates in this industry with like boards at the sort of Fortune 500 level, so there's more money spent on wellness every year than the entire GDP of Germany, which blew my mind, right? Yet you look at things like the studies from Gallup saying, well, over 50% of the people, it's higher and lower in some regions, but circa 50% saying I'm really stressed day to day, and there's 85+% of people meeting the definition of disengaged. So it's like, well, okay, so the wellness stuff, especially around the stress metric, is saying, well, it's not hitting the ground. And so to me, it's like, yeah, if you're going to do this, you got to be intentional, and you got to do it piece by piece, and don't just throw money at it, because that's not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, there is no silver bullet. There is no panacea. Really, really interesting insight there. We're just on time for today. Really like that kind of final bit as a closing piece as a CPO. Just kind of listen, have that trust and the understanding that you can't always control things centrally, as you said. Feels like I can hear our co-founder Kathy's voice ringing in my ear talking about empowering line managers and developing out line manager capability so that they can help to support this approach. And amazing getting you on. We will 100% have you back on to chew the fat over many other topics. I know you and I have spoken about 3 or 4 other topics, so I'll drag you on if you're willing to come on. But thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, my pleasure, mate. Happy to come on anytime. Felt like it's a lot of quick fire questions, get the brain going, which really put me on my toes. But yeah, mate, happy to come back and chew the fat anytime.
Yeah, lovely. And as always, co-host Mr. Horton, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Chris Howard. Have a good one.
Yep. And of course, you can get this podcast wherever you get this podcast. We're on the Lace Partners website. If you go to lacepartners.co.uk/podcast, you can find all of our podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. We're across all of the main channels that you'd expect. I won't name them and give them a little bit of free publicity. You can find that out yourself. But from myself, from Ant, and from Chris, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and hopefully we'll catch you next time on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye-bye.